So Solana is the coin token asset that I get probably the most questions about, especially as we've seen such a brilliant rally in some of these alternate coins like Solana and ETH compared to Bitcoin in the last week or so. Everybody is getting really excited and pretty bullish again. I always get a little bit nervous when people get really, really bullish. So certainly we ended last week in that kind of really good, warm, bouncy vibe sentiment. But over the weekend, often the mood music changes, and that has happened in quite a lot of assets. And so far this week, I know it's only Tuesday, but we have gone sideways. Well, I think it's quite important here when we just look at this weekly chart of Solana to point out is that we have reached a really important pivot level. If we go all the way back here to 2021, we can see around this 175 level, these weekly closing highs here and these lows here, some in the middle here, you can see that this is a pretty interesting pivot level around this 175 level. And if we can break above it, then I would say the next one I would argue is up here around 200, just above 200. So we're at a pretty interesting level. When I look at, as you know, I always look at measured moves and Fibonacci mainly for my kind of targets and risk management. And when I look at this whole big pattern that we've made in Sol against the dollar all the way back to this 2020, this is really two equal measured moves. Overlapping as well, very typical. Yes, we had a little bit of a spike and look above, but we couldn't close above this equal measured move level. And the most common, when you get an equal measured move level like this, the most common retrace is a 786 fib retrace in 3 moves. So if we put this, I'm going to go from this low here to this high. I'm not sure about the low here. I usually go, because it's a mathematical chart, I usually reset it to 0. So if we do that here in the Solana chart, we can see that these previous fib levels worked really well. So basically, from the all-time lows to the all-time highs in Solana, we have done we've pulled back to 61.8 fib. We've pulled back, if we count this as a 5 waves up, we've pulled back to this previous bottom of this wave 4. It's a very common retrace. And this was a really decent place to bounce from. It was also the weekly 200 moving average. The problem is with this fib pattern, so if we go from this low to high, when you bounce from a 61.8 fib, your first target is always the 38.2 fib, which is here at 182.50, which is where we've just gone into this kind of pause mode, haven't we? And around this 175, 180 level is a really interesting support and resistance level that we have reached. One of the most common patterns when you do this 61.8 fib golden ratio zone is that you quite often go back and forward in this golden ratio zone. You can, I wouldn't, sometimes you do it twice, and we see this here very this is obviously a very choppy zone, and we've reached, or we are getting pretty close to the top of it. The other thing that I would note here is if you do this 61.8 fib reversal, if you're going to keep going, so if we were to have a pullback here, this 50% level through the middle, which in Solana is 150, and was also quite a sticky level here, we can see from this bounce that we had in March and April, this 150 in the middle, 147.66 on Binance, this 50% level from all-time highs to all-time lows is quite significant. So we could very easily see a pullback to this level and another leg higher from here, and it wouldn't kind of change my view. The problem is I still think that we're going to go 1, 2, 3 eventually, because this is the most common pattern retrace of a big ABC like this. So if you're still, or you tentatively bought Solana, your key question in your mind is, are we going to keep going higher and break through? Is this first swing of this low that we made in April complete, or is this going to be a bearish reversal? I would say a weekly close back underneath this weekly 50 moving average, which is really significant, would point back to a pullback to the middle of this range, to that 147 50% level, and we'll see what happens there. So for me, long Solana, a close underneath this 168 level points to a bigger pullback to 147, and whilst we hold above this important fib level, I think we're still going higher, but we need to clear 182.50 to make the next swing. I'm going to go down to the daily, and you can see that this weekly fib, this is the daily 200 moving average, which Solana does react to, so it's quite a big deal. And also, you know, if this is going to be correction complete, I would expect this to be 3 waves with a relationship between the two. And if we do that here and say this is our 3-wave correction in the middle, or even from here, you can see that we are at that 61.8 level. So this then becomes pretty important resistance, and our next upside level is 202, which we talked about, because 200, 202 is really important resistance. So now we've got a trading plan. We can say we hold above 182, our next upside is 202, but we've got to break above this really significant resistance. And if we break down underneath this cluster of where we are, we're likely to see a bigger pullback to 147. So we're really in a big kind of decision. Let's go back to that weekly. There's our weekly. This is our decision where we're likely to go sideways then and see which way from here in Solana, unfortunately. And then, you know, if we could argue that this correction is complete, but it's just so small compared to the others. I'm going to lean about some point up here. You know, if we make a really big swing, you know, we could get back up to 225, 240, even 260. But this is a kind of really big decision level, and I honestly don't know which way we're going to go, but it looks good holding above that weekly 50 moving average, but we're stuck underneath the daily 200. So we need a little breakout from this range, and sure enough, this is our 4th day of trading sideways in this range, 4th day of dojis going sideways, trying to decide which way next in Solana. I do think if we do continue higher, we still are owed another leg lower. Now this makes it kind of a bit of a bullish Gartley if we do that. Let's go back to the weekly. A Gartley pattern has a first swing down to the 61.8, a bounce, 3 waves, and then another swing lower to that 786 fib. And that's a really, really bullish pattern. So if we make this pattern, you know, 60, 63 is where you kind of really want to back up the truck in Solana and fill up, you know, and the sentiment, but if we get down here, will be terrible. It will be a really, really good place to look for a bounce. So that's how I'm looking at Solana US dollar. One chart that makes me pretty happy is Solana Bitcoin. And when you think how much money has gone into Bitcoin, this is good news, because for me, this is not the same bearish pattern that we see in Solana against US dollar. If I look all the way back to the lows that we made in December 2022 here, and this is the, obviously, this 2022 was the FTX crash, we can see 5 waves up and 3 waves back to this previous wave. We got a little bit underneath it, but back again to one of these 61.8 fib levels. So I'm not looking for lower in Solana against Bitcoin, and this for me is a little bit more bullish and a little bit more encouraging. And this also, this B leg in the middle, very unfolded very nicely as well. The problem is we've got a lot of resistance. So let's apply the same rules that we did just now to Solana US dollar from this high, because this is a big 3-wave move. As you know, I would expect this, even if we just bounce here, I would expect this up. The first target would be back to these swing highs here, 0.0027, and a 786 fib retrace of this bigger 3-wave move. So if this is a first swing of a bigger 3-wave move, this is really my first target, and my second target is going to be new highs when I look at this Solana Bitcoin chart. The problem is, as you know, this 236 fib is our first resistance to get above, and that's what we need to close above if we've really bottomed here, and that's at 0.0017. So this is what we've got to close above if we're going to see our bigger target. Potentially this is just a three-wave move and we could still continue lower. So this is pretty important resistance, 0.0017. When I look at it is, and what we've done here, we've done kind of one of those double top swing failure patterns, and we're in a really tough sideways range here. I don't think this is a head and shoulders pattern. I think this is a broadening wedge, but I think this is really bullish for Solana if we can hold above it. 0.0017 then, 0.0017082. That's what I am looking at in Solana Bitcoin, but bigger picture. This is actually, we could see Solana outperform Bitcoin. This is a much more bullish weekly chart pattern. We will have bottomed if we can break above this resistance level. So quite a lot of markets, quite a big decision here. But you know, in previous altcoin seasons, which I don't think, you know, we're going to see, you know, they always evolve. We never see them the same way again. But the first good sign is that Bitcoin stops going up, starts going sideways, and then this love spreads to the kind of bigger altcoins, particularly the more utility ones. And then, you know, the love spreads outward, or the profits that get taken and spread out from there. Quite a few of these older utility coins are making some pretty interesting bottoming patterns. Certainly in the meme coin space even, you know, we could argue that bigger picture on the daily here, Solana against Bitcoin, that this is potentially a little bit of an inverted head and shoulders pattern just underneath this 236 fib that we have broken out from, but we really need to get above this level if we're going to keep going. Next upside target in Solana against Bitcoin obviously is going to be 0.00197, which is the daily 200 moving average, and then ultimately I think we outperform and we go much higher. So this is looking certainly better than the quite a few charts out there in terms of a bottoming pattern, and I see this quite a lot across quite a lot of the space. Good luck. Let me know if there's